So this afternoon, or our lesson for today, is Introduction to Engineering Economics. Before we go through the lessons, it is imperative for us to have a good grasp of what engineering economics is about. So that's what we'll talk about today. So our hope is at the end of this lecture, you should be able to, number one, explain what engineering economics is all about. And secondly, apply the principles of engineering economy in engineering decisions. Let's start, or let's begin by defining what economics is. So one of the prime movers of the field of economics, Adam Smith, defined economics as a study of wealth in 1776. Economics, as defined by the AEA, or the American Economics Association, is the study of how people choose to use resources. And taking that a bit further, it is a study of human behavior as a relationship between given ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. So this is the definition by Lionel Robbins. So there is cognizance that we have very limited resource, and that with that set of resources, there could be a lot of multiple different conflicting uses. So it's what we acknowledge in Robbins's definition. Pero yung word is best understood if we look at its etymology. And so economics is derived from two Greek words, oikos, which means house, and nomos, which means management or rules. If we put them together, it means rules of the house or management of the house. And so, if you come to think of it, yung term na home economics would sound pretty redundant, no? Kasi yung concept of it being management of the house is already built in the word economics. Basically, ang pinanggalingan nito is that if we have a home, no? And then we have a finite set of resources, we have to manage how much resources would go into food, into paying bills, into other needs like shelter, power, etc., or education, etc. And if we look at the broader context, no, so economics is not only at the scale of household. We can employ actually the same principle at the level of the community, at the level of the country, or even globally. In fact, Paul Samuelson in 1948 defined economics as the study of how societies use scarce resources to produce valuable commodities and distribute them among different people. No? So again, as mentioned in the previous slide, there is cognizance that the resources are scarce. In fact, we say that they're finite. No? And so, it's our choice kung paano natin siya i-allocate. So, and which products of value do we actually prioritize? All right, so that's economics. And if you've heard of the term carbon footprint, no, so that's basically a reflection of how much of the Earth's resources we are consuming. No, so if everyone would live lavish lifestyles similar to how they do in a lot of first world countries, we would need 3.28 Earths. That tells us that the resources that we have in the world isn't sufficient to cater to that lavish lifestyle. And so as a result, some of us would have to live with smaller means. No? So kaya nga a lot of people live in poverty or even below poverty line because some people live very lavish lifestyles. And so economics is basically the study of how people and societies would allocate these scarce resources to satisfy the unlimited, not only needs, but also wants that we want to sustain. Now, I'd also like to point out that the perspective of economics is forward-looking. It means that we look at future impacts, future cash flows, prospective outcomes of the choice that we make today. This is in contrast with accounting, which is basically an analysis of the cash flows that have already transpired, or the cash flows that have already occurred in the past. No? With accounting, what we do, we record the expenses, the cash inflows, and we balance them, we track them, saan siya napunta, saan nanggaling yung which cash flow. So that's what we do in accounting. With economics, we have a decision now. We try to project what consequences it'll have in the future, and then we try to evaluate. We try to evaluate yung mga economic value nito mga consequences na to so that we can evaluate whether or not a project is worth undertaking or a decision is worth pursuing. All right. So basically, with economics, what we estimate required investments, we estimate operating, even maintenance costs, we forecast demands for a product, we determine an optimal pricing rather. Kasi alam natin, di ba, with the law of supply and demand, with constant demand, if you increase the pricing, if you increase the pricing, then you reduce the demand, basically, no? With constant supply. And we also, in economics, estimating product life is also a concern. No? And these are all uncertain to an extent. So meron tayong malaking uncertainty involved. Also, unlike accounting, economics is not really does not really work with deterministic na perspective. Now, we're done with defining economics. Ngayon naman, recap tayo of the definition of engineering. And we all know, because we're all engineering majors, no? Engineering is the application of scientific and mathematical principles to practical ends, such as the design and manufacture of safe, efficient, and economic technologies and structures to address and solve problems. Address needs and solve problems. So basically, we engineers are problem solvers, which is why your term project for this course is actually about developing solutions to one pressing problem that your group has identified. According to the American Engineers Council for Professional Development, or the AECPD, it is the creative application of scientific principles to design or develop structures, machines, apparatus, or manufacturing processes or works utilizing them either in singly or in combination to construct or operate the same with full cognizance of their design, to forecast their behavior. Note the word forecast. And that's important because that has a lot to do with future outcomes under specific operating conditions, all as respects an intended function, economics of operation, and safety to life and property. So you'll notice that actually the principles or economics are embedded in engineering. No? And as such, yung engineering economics is basically the application of economic principles and methods in engineering decision making. So examples. Una, evaluation of the economic merit of an engineering design or project. So is a project worth undertaking? We should be able to answer that using engineering economics. Secondly, selection of the best solution alternative to an engineering problem. So sabi nila, there are various ways, 1,000 ways to skin a cat. No? But that's a morbid idiom. Ibig lang sabihin nun, meron tayong a lot of different ways to solve the same problem. And one of them might be the most optimal one. So pwede natin tong malaman through the use of tools in engineering economics. And thirdly, optimization of costs, maximizing profitability, or even maximizing revenue in engineering projects. No? So yung mga pwede nating gawin. Now, let me walk you through the origins of engineering economics. No? So, a bit of history. So, in 1887, a railroad engineer wrote a book entitled The Economic Theory of Location of Railways. So, ito si Arthur M. Wellington. So now, ano ba yung importance ng economics in location of railways? No? So Arthur M. Wellington had a project to construct an interstate rail line. Ano yung mga economic decisions involved dito? There's a lot, actually. So if you consider kung saan mo papadaanin yung rail line natin, it will have immense economic impact on the project, no? Now, assuming that from between the two terminals, padaanin mo siya in all rural areas and wasteland, then una, the cost of acquiring those lands would definitely be a lot less than, say, padaanin mo siya sa mga rural and suburban areas and you need to buy all those lands. No, it will cost a lot less to get the rail line passed through wastelands and rural areas. Correct? Secondly, yung cost din ng employment. If you need to hire people, the cost of them working in urban parts of the states na dadaanan ng rail line natin will be a lot less. No? However, on the flip side, if you consider the operating phase of the rail line, if most of it would pass through rural areas, and you would probably have less demand and therefore lower profitability for the operation of railway. In contrast, if you get it to pass through cities and suburbs, you have more population to cater to, and therefore substantially higher demands, no, and therefore greater profitability. Now, where do we balance? Where do we strike the balance between the two? That's for engineering economics to answer. All right. Next milestone in the 1920s, no? In 1920, O.B. Goldman published a book called Financial Engineering. It's basically the application of financial mathematics for engineering applications. And J.C.L. Fish independently published the first principles of engineering economics in 1923, which introduced the use of financial and actuarial mathematics in the evaluation of structures. No? Financial mathematics basically deals with interests, yung mga interest calculations, that's financial mathematics. Actuarial mathematics, on the other hand, deals with cash flows being probabilistic in nature. So ito yung ginagamit na math for the insurance industry. So may kasamang statistics, para pinagsama siyang statistics and economics na mathematics. And in 1930, Eugene L. Grant introduced method in evaluating and comparing investments based on compound interest in his book called The Principles of Engineering Economics. And as such, Eugene Grant is considered the father of modern engineering economics. All right, so I guess that's enough of trivia and history. I hope it was interesting for you. Let's talk about possible applications of engineering economics, but I want your participation here. So, supposing we're tasked to build a road link, no? A road that links a rural barangay to its poblacion or the town center. What engineering economics question could be asked about the project? Or what engineering economic concern can we talk about? Feel free to type them in the chat box, whether through direct message or you can send to everyone. Don't be shy. What engineering economics question could be asked about a road linking a rural barangay to the town proper? So yes, what is the total cost of the project? How would the project benefit the locals, or how would the project impact the locals? Who will be using the road? Will the net benefits outweigh the cost? Ayan, salamat at marami kayong sagot. What materials should be used in the construction of the road? Correct, no? That will impact the cash flow a lot. Saan natin papadaanin yung road, no? The design and the path of the road. Yes. Yan. Yeah, what is the cost of transportation of materials? Also very important. And how will the project benefit the livelihood of the people in the area? These are very good and insightful answers. So thank you. I've pre-listed some of these. I think medyo pare-parehas tayo ng ano, diba? Great minds think alike. So I'm glad na pare-parehas tayo ng naisip. Yun. So is it priced? Yung follow-up question dun sa how much does it cost? Is it priced appropriately? No? So sakto ba yung cost ng project? What are the benefits? What are the disbenefits? And will the benefits actually outweigh the cost? No? As you may know, or hindi necessarily alam nyo na, but NEDA, the National Economic Development Authority, when they evaluate infrastructures for funding, tinitignan nila yung valuation of all the benefits of the project and they weigh it against the cost. And they do cost-benefit analysis to check whether or not the project is worth undertaking. Kino-compare din kasi nila yan with a lot of other projects na pinopropose sa kanila. And of course, the funding goes to the most beneficial ones. No? One quite specific example, is it better to use Portland cement concrete, which is more expensive but would probably have a long lifespan compared to, let's say, asphalt, which would be a lot cheaper because it's easier to pave, no? Cheaper materials, but with possibly less or shorter life cycle. Isa pang pwede nating pag-isipan, nabanggit nyo kanina, what is the cost of transportation of the material? Let's say may dilemma tayo, we have to choose between two suppliers. One supplier offers the same materials for a cheaper price, pero it's quite farther from the project site versus one that is very close to the project site, but it's substantially higher in terms of cost. No? So we have to use economic tools in order for us to be able to evaluate which one is a better alternative of the two. All right, so thank you for your active participation. Marami pa mga pwedeng itanong dito na economic related. So, other examples of possible engineer economic problem, where should we locate a factory that we intend to build? So, should we locate it within the metropolis or in the province? Between the two, land is more expensive in the metro versus less expensive land in the outskirts or in the province. Wage is higher in the metro versus in the province, although I should say that this is not a very good practice that we have substantially higher wage in the metros compared to provincial rates kasi it drives people away from actually it tends to encourage people to migrate from where they are to the metro, also causing urban influx. Well, on the contrary, on the flip side, if you situate your factory within the metropolis, you'll be closer to the clients, and you'll also be closer to the major ports where the supplies arrive. In contrast, if you locate it in the province, there'll probably be substantial cost for hauling supplies in and hauling products out to clients. No? So may mga trade-offs tayo. And the key to actually deciding whether which of the two options are better is actually to evaluate each of these and then to do an overall economic analysis. All right? Kasama din sa mga possible na pag-isipan natin, the choice of material. Let's say you have two different candidate materials for a product that you're manufacturing. One is cheaper, the other is a bit more expensive, pero in terms of workability, mas madali yung isa, yung mas expensive, no? It's easier to work with, requiring less energy compared to the other one, which could entail more power, or more manpower. How do we balance the two? Sipin nyo lang din, no, in yung mga printers natin, we do have a lot of options. And they vary in terms of the cost of the equipment, the processing speed, the quality of their printout, the power consumption, the efficiencies, and their corresponding costs. So it's a matter of balancing, diba? A matter of balancing. Sabihin sa'yo, recently medyo maraming nagtitext, I'm not sure if it's a scam, na nagbebenta ng mga solar panels. And with solar panels, they'll tell you it's quite an investment at the beginning, pero you'll save in the long run. How do you balance your what you fork out at the beginning versus what you expect to save in the long run is a matter of economics then. Is it time to replace an equipment? No, so alam nyo, this is actually a very common very common dilemma, and it's not just an engineering dilemma. It's I think it's second nature to us people to hold on to something, no? Kapag napakarami na nating na invest, di ba? So sabihin natin, I've already invested a lot on this, so it's difficult to let go, no? So we tend to hold on to something, or maybe someone. Joke. We've put a lot of investments into. Pero sometimes we fail to look at to look forward. Ano yung mga consequence pa niya in the future? For instance, with an old car which would have a diminished efficiency and also which would require more maintenance, sabi natin, ang laki kasi ng ginastos ko to be able to restore this, no? So sayang naman kung i-let go ko na to. Pero sometimes we fail to see na malaki pa yung gagastusin kong maintenance annually because of this. And because of the inefficiencies, I'll probably spend more on fuel. I'll probably encounter occasional car breakdowns na medyo may inconvenience ako. 'Di ba? May mga ganon. The same thing for other machineries. No? So we have to think about that. And I'd like to point you to a principle called sunk cost fallacy. No? So yun yung principle behind this. Na all the cash flows that occurred in the past shouldn't actually be a substantive consideration when you do your economic analysis, because ang concern talaga natin between now and the future, ano yung best option for us. Other examples, so profit maximization, cost reduction, whether or not to invest. What do we do it ourselves? So kung meron kayong company, do you do it in-house, or do you get someone outside the company to do it for you? Do you automate, or do you keep it manual? So these are some examples confronted by engineering firms that may entail the use of engineering economics. All right. At this point, are there questions? Don't be shy. No? So if you have questions, feel free to type in the chat box or raise your hand. And Sir Ashton and Sir Justin will be happy to answer your questions. Okay, mukhang wala naman. I think we can proceed to the next slide. Now, this is an overview of the engineering economic decision analysis process. And this is also a preview of what you'll go through with your term project. No? So we start with problem recognition, formulation, and evaluation. Now we go into the recognition of the dimensions of the decision problem. And we start identifying and developing our alternatives or the solutions to the problem. And then we evaluate the economic outcome for every alternative that we have identified. And then we analyze each of the alternatives that we have, whether or not they're feasible, and then we compare them, and then it doesn't stop there. No? So because a lot of our analysis are hinged on assumptions and forecasts, then it is imperative for us to monitor and post-evaluate the results, whether or not tama ba yung mga assumptions natin, or whether we should tweak some so that we could have a better informed economic analysis in the future for future decisions. All right? Questions that we normally would ask, no? For problem recognition, what is the identified need? Or what is the decision at hand? No? So this is the question that we need to confront. Ano yung kailangan nating ma-address? Next, recognition of the dimensions of the decision problem. What are the important considerations in the decision? Would it be costs? Would it be environmental impact? Would it be societal impact? What specifically? No? So what attributes or factors are important to consider? Thirdly, what are the potential solutions or courses of action? Ito yung mga alternative natin, yung mga potential solutions. Number 4, and then once we have the solution concepts, we think about ano yung mga costs, how much would it entail to develop that solution or to deploy that solution. At the same time, we evaluate the benefits. Ano yung mga benefits if we pursue this solution, and we also try to get the economic value of that. How much are they worth? And then, with the analysis of each of the alternatives, we talk about what is the net economic outcome for each of these alternatives. And we ask the question, considering that that is the net economic outcome, do we say that it's an acceptable alternative or not? Is it worth pursuing as an alternative? And then finally, after considering all the decision aspects, no, which one is the most preferable alternative? So yun yung magiging result ng ating comparison and selection of the best alternative. And as mentioned, after that, we shouldn't stop, no? So kailangan may performance monitoring. And question naman to ask at that phase is, are our assumptions correct? No? So is our selected alternative performing as forecast? All right? Is everything clear? If everything's clear so far, can I get the party popper react? Ayan, so mukhang clear naman. Salamat sa pakikinig. Yeah. Okay, so next tayo. Principles of engineering, economic analysis, and decision making. So these principles are adopted from Sullivan et al. Pero I tried to streamline it to 5. Meron siyang 7. These 5 are: number 1, use a consistent perspective. Secondly, that we consider all relevant decision dimensions. Third is that we ensure comparability across different alternatives. Number 4, we focus on the difference. And number 5, that we be transparent in our assumptions and uncertainties. Daanan natin isa-isa tong mga to. First, the use of consistent perspective means that all the prospective outcomes, whether it be cost or benefits, should be developed from a consistent and defined perspective. No? So if we, let's say, want to compare yung, I'm not sure what you call this, yung baby, yung nakasabit sa crib ng baby, no? So if we have 2 alternatives, both of them should be evaluated from the same perspective, whether from the perspective of the parent or the perspective of the baby. Hindi pwedeng yung isa we evaluate from the perspective of the parent, the other we evaluate from the perspective of the baby. So on a broader context, so we can either take the perspective of the firm or the company, the project owner, the public, okay, the government, diba? Or the client. At the same time, pwede rin na combination, no? Na for instance, benefit cost analysis of public projects. What we usually do is we take the perspective of the government when we talk about the cost, but then we take the perspective of the public or the general public, which is being served by the project, pag kinonsider natin yung mga benefits. So pwedeng ganun, as long as you use it consistently for all the projects that you're evaluating. All right. So use a consistent perspective. Second is that we should consider all relevant decision dimensions. No? So it's important that all relevant project stakeholders are considered and all the considerations important to them are taken into account in the decision-making process. All right? So at the end of your engineering economic process, you should be confident to say that, yes, I've considered everything that is important in this decision process. No? Kasi a lot of projects fail because sometimes we push into the back burner some issues that are supposed to be relevant, no, before we decide. Next tayo. Pang ilan neto? Does anyone remember or meron bang nakapag-keep track? Can you type in sa chat box kung pang ilan na ito sa ating principle? Okay, correct. Thank you. This is the third principle that we ensure comparability across alternatives. No? So we make sure that the premise and grounds for comparison allow us to compare the alternatives fairly. So we don't compare apples with oranges. So we make sure that we're able to do a fair comparison by using the same unit of measure and using the same perspective. For two projects with similar outcome, we can easily compare costs and inputs. For two or more projects with similar inputs, then we can possibly compare them in terms of their outcomes or in terms of profit or benefits. Now, for two projects with maybe different outcomes and different inputs then, two or more projects, pwede nating i-compare yung kanilang net present worth of the cost-benefit analysis. So pwedeng ganon. But we also need to make sure that the parameters that we set the comparison for are fair for all the alternatives being considered. And then, next, number 4 is that we should focus on the differences. No? This just has to be said, pero if we compare two things on a parameter that they're very similar in, no, so it wouldn't lead us to a decision. No? So kaya important na when comparing alternatives, we identify kung saan sila magkaiba. So only differences in estimated future outcomes between alternatives are relevant to the comparison and should be considered in the decision. And then finally, we should be transparent about our assumptions and uncertainties. As mentioned earlier, so economics deal with projections, future outcomes, so forecasts. So it is imperative or it is implicit for us to be making assumptions when we do forecasts. And since these are forecasts, uncertainties are inherent. So we have to acknowledge that we have to be transparent when doing the analysis. Kaya din important to kasi as we monitor and we see that things don't go as analyzed, we'll see at saan nga ba yung dapat na i-tweak natin so that we can make better analysis in the future. All right, so those are the five principles. So una, use a consistent perspective. Secondly, consider all relevant dimensions. Third, ensure comparability across alternatives. Fourth, that we focus on the differences. And then fifth, we make transparent our assumptions and uncertainties. All right? Okay, so that ends the first part of today's discussion. Meron pa tayong part 2, pero at this point, are there questions?